Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their
Episode
perspectives
11,
from
the
having
Richmond
years of
Massacre.
911
On
dispatch
today's episode,
experience.
we discuss the 7-day crime spree of Ricky Gray and Ray Dandridge.
To start off today's episode, I'm going to ask you guys if you have ever dispatched a suspicious fire.
Yes, kind of. I know I've dispatched them before. I don't specifically remember them. The only reason I remember one of them is because the reporting party called with somebody that I knew and they got a little sassy and I had had a real bad day. So I maybe got a little sassy back and then I figured out who it was and I felt so bad. I did reach out to them later and was like, "Hey, I'm sorry." And they were like, "Yeah, bad day." And I was like, "Yeah,
Maybe.
But after that, I was like, man, I need to make sure I rein it in a little bit because that was embarrassing. So sorry.
There was one summer a few years ago where we had a string of fires along our golf course, and it was too coincidental to be natural caused, and it took not too long for them to figure out, but they determined it was arson, and they started going around to all the really nice fancy houses around the golf course, all of whom are owned by people that are well off that like to keep an eye on their property. So they all have security cameras which could clearly see the scenes of where the fire started, and it didn't take very long for them to get caught. But we definitely, I think, have more of wildland situations that turn out to be man-created, man-started arson that way. I can't remember much of as far as a suspicious house fire. I know I've worked them, but I don't specifically remember calls for them.
I did take, I forgot about this one, which is crazy that I did, but I did take a suspicious house fire, but it wasn't really a house fire because it didn't actually, well, it was a house fire because it took houses, but
Not the house that
was intended to take. And it was this whole ordeal. But that one was weird because they didn't have enough evidence to really, they had a suspect in mind, but they didn't have enough evidence to really pursue that suspect. So
I can't remember when it was, but I think there was one time when there was a couple businesses in the same general area. I think I was working with Jess. Maybe not. I don't know. But somebody had lit a business or somewhere near a business on fire, and then a few minutes later there was a fire at another business down the way. Do you remember
sounds
that?
familiar. Yeah. I don't remember details, but that sounds familiar.
I don't either, but I just remember we were looking and we kept having to send people to different places.
Yeah, it was dumpster fires or something that were clustered. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really weird. So today's story is a long one, and kind of long. And then I kind of have to add in there that I found all this information when I was researching Jack the Ripper, because I came across this lady named Patricia Cornwell in the research that I was doing. And she is also a crime reporter, and she also writes books, and some of her books are based on the story I'm going to tell you that feature a medical examiner named Kay Scarpetta. So if anyone's read them, you should send us a message. I want to know if they're any good. The murders that I'm going to tell you about took place in Richmond, the capital of Virginia, in 2006. It was basically a 7-day murder spree of 2 men. The men who were involved were Ricky Jovan Gray, who was 29 at the time, and his nephew, Ray Joseph Dandridge, who was also 29. So the story begins on New Year's Day, 2006, in the Woodland Heights district of Virginia, when a 911 call was placed by a friend of the Harvey family, reporting that he had arrived to the Harvey home and found that the house was on fire. So he was there for a scheduled New Year's party, I guess they had every year, and the house was full of smoke. He opened the door and he just found that it was full of smoke, so he called 911. And when firefighters entered the house, they discovered the bodies of the Harvey family in the basement. The family had been bound with electrical cord and tape and beaten with a claw hammer and had their throats slit. The victims were Catherine Elizabeth Harvey, who was 39 years old, and she co-owned a popular local toy shop called World of Mirth in Richmond. She's also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, who is best known for his role as Robert F. Kennedy in the movie 13 Days. Catherine's husband, Brian Tabor Harvey, was 49 years old. He was the lead singer and guitarist of the band House of Freaks. House of Freaks was a two-man band featuring Brian, who sang and played the guitar, and his friend Johnny Hott, who played percussion. You can hear some of their songs on YouTube still, and they're actually pretty good. I think it's pretty cool because there was only 2 of them. The band's sound was described as a mix of folk and rock that was influenced by blues and Americana, and according to one article I read, Rolling Stone later credited them with foreshadowing groups like the White Stripes and Black Keys.
That's cool.
And Johnny Hott was the 911 caller who noticed that the family home was on fire.
No.
Their 2 daughters were also murdered. Stella Ann was 9 and Ruby May was 4. I couldn't find a lot of information on the girls, but the family was well known in the area and everybody loved them and had nothing but good things to say about them. Apparently, the perpetrators were on the lookout for a home to rob on New Year's Day when they noticed that the front door of the Harveys' residence was opened. They entered the house and Gray bound Catherine, Brian, and Ruby in the basement with extension cord and plastic tape while Dandridge searched the house for valuable items. Stella had been at a friend's house and returned home when the suspects were still going through the house, and at this time, Gray let Catherine go upstairs to get her daughter. The mother of Stella's friend, Kirsten Perkinson, had a brief conversation with Catherine before she left. She advised officers later that she appeared pale and ashen, and she did not indicate that anything was wrong during their conversation, probably because she was terrified. Catherine and Stella were then taken to the basement where they were bound with packing tape by Gray. Stella and Ruby began to panic, and shortly after, Gray began stabbing the victims and then slit the throats of all 4 of the victims before taking a claw hammer to them.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Jesus, overkill.
it was pretty intense, definitely overkill. The reports on cause of death were as follows. Catherine and Brian died of blunt force trauma to the head. Stella, smoke inhalation and blunt force trauma to the head, and Ruby, a punctured lung and stab wounds to the back. After they murdered the victims, they then tipped over an art easel, covered it in wine, and set it on fire in an attempt to destroy the crime scene. The men then fled with a plate full of cookies, a computer, and Brian's wedding ring. So all of that for cookies, a computer, and a ring.
Cool. Way to be stellar people there.
It's so sad. Later, the killer would testify that the victims didn't die instantly. He said, they kept getting up and this is a quote, he said, they was scaring me. The men would go on to rob another residence and on January 3rd would get away with a computer, television, and $800 in cash. These victims escaped the fate of the Harveys, so they made it out alive somehow.
But they were home as well.
Yeah, they were home as well. Yeah. 3 days later, the police would be called to the scene of another crime. The call came in as a welfare check. The caller was requesting a police officer check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Bakersville. She also mentioned that she thought Ashley's boyfriend and his cousin were involved in the Harveys homicide. And Ashley was staying with her mother, Mary Bakersville Tucker, and her stepfather, Purcell Tucker. The police found the family dead in their home. They were gagged and bound, and the parents had slashed throats along with layers of duct tape wrapped around their heads. Ashley was also found deceased, and the cause of death for all 3 of the victims was suffocation. On January 7th, 2006, the murderers Ricky Gray and Ray Dandridge were arrested at Dandridge's father's house in Philadelphia. 1 hour after their arrest, Dandridge confessed to killing Ashley and her parents. Gray asked to speak to detectives 12 hours after his arrest, and then he provided details confessing on how they killed the Harveys. After making his confession, he told the detectives, I really don't know how I was able to do that. I don't believe sorry is enough. None of this was necessary. He also told police that he was high at the time of his murders. He also confessed later that he had beat his wife, Treva, to death while his cousin held her down. Jeez. So Treva Terrell Gray was 35 years old when her badly beaten body was found on November 5th, 2005 in a shallow grave in Washington, Pennsylvania. Gray and Treva had been married approximately 6 months when her murder occurred. They had lived in a house owned by Treva's family, and Dandridge had lived with the couple after being released from prison after serving more than 10 years for an armed robbery charge. Treva's family told police that the couple had fought bitterly and they had seen claw marks on Gray's arms the day that his wife's body was found. Police had ruled her death as suspicious, but there was no real investigation at the time until Gray confessed. Treva's family evicted Gray after her death, which led to him moving to West Philadelphia to stay with his father, and Dandridge joined Gray on Christmas Day.
So she was found in a shallow grave.
Correct.
police thought it was suspicious, quote unquote,
Yeah.
and then didn't look into it?
Nope, they didn't really look into it until he confessed.
And what year was this?
2005.
Wow.
November 5th of 2005 is when he killed his wife, and then obviously wasn't very long after. It was 2 months later? Not even 2 months later when he killed the Harvey family. So had they looked into this murder, right? The Harvey
Had they
family
done their
would still be
jobs.
alive, probably.
Yeah.
Wow, sounds like negligence.
Yes, it
Liability
does.
issues. Weird.
Yeah. The Bakersfield family would be alive. Butterfly effect, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested in knowing, because I couldn't find a lot of details on why they didn't look into it, but like, it's kind of like that, what we talked about last week, that lady who committed suicide, right? By shooting herself in the stomach, but it wasn't probably really a suicide. It's
Yeah.
just kind of like, this seems suspicious, but we're not going to investigate it.
That just
I
doesn't
know,
make any sense.
yeah.
You find a shallow grave with somebody dead in it. Your job is to figure out what happened.
Yeah, and I would say as she's 35 years old, that's suspicious.
She's in a
Well,
shallow grave.
Even if
and
she
of
was
course it's
suicidal, she's not going to
suspicious.
bury herself.
I once watched, I forget, I'll have to figure out, but I watched a documentary, and I kid you not, the detective said it's almost impossible for a suicidal person to hide their body after they kill themselves.
Almost
What do you mean
impossible.
possible?
Almost impossible.
Almost impossible. Yeah.
Because they're just a missing person at that point, because you're not positive, like you haven't found the body yet because it's wilderness, but like, are you really trying to find the body? Or like,
But
what
also,
mean
how do you hide your body? How do you hide a body at all after you're dead?
your ghosts, guys,
Ghosts.
I mean, I am not a detective, but I would say it is impossible. Not nearly impossible, but impossible. That's my opinion. Like I've already said a million times on this podcast, I'm not an expert. But the whole thing is suspicious, right? They're like, oh yeah, they got in a fight and he had scratch marks on him and now she's in a shallow grave.
Oh, well.
People have been arrested for less.
That's so weird.
In this line of
anyway.
in this line of
Yeah.
work, that's what we would call a clue.
Oh, look, Blue, a clue.
Oh, look, Blue, a clue. Shallow grave. You have scratches, so your girlfriend is dead in a shallow grave, and you have scratches on your arm. That's weird. That's
Well,
weird.
and
But tell me more about
they
that.
were
Carry on.
only married for 6 months. Like, what was going on? Obviously, she was not safe. So, there are more crimes linked to them, which I'm going to tell you about. On December 31st, 2005, a 26-year-old man named Ryan Carey was attacked by Dandridge and Gray in front of his parents' home in Arlington. Carey was badly beaten and stabbed in the chest, neck, and arms, and it was a near-fatal attack. He spent 2 weeks in a coma, and he also lost the use of his right arm as a result of the attack. On January 3rd, 2006, Dandridge and Gray broke into a couple's home in Chesterfield County, Virginia. The couple later reported that the two men and a woman who were claiming to need directions broke in and stole a computer and television as well as the $800 in cash. So this is the family that made it out alive, right? The woman was Ashley Bakersfield, who, if you'll remember, is one of the victims. She was identified as a participant in the Harvey murders, the Chesterfield robbery, and the robbery of her parents. Dandridge and Gray told officers she was the lookout for the two when she was found deceased. She was wearing Harvey's wedding ring, so the ring that they stole, she had. To
Oh,
assist
God.
Dandridge and Gray, in the robbery of her parents, Ashley acted like a victim and allowed them to tie her up as part of the plan. It's alleged that Gray was tired of her, so he decided to kill her so he could take the parents' car and get rid of her. After she assisted in a murder, a robbery, and then trying to rob her parents.
Well, she was a
Tying up
tool.
loose ends.
Yep.
Yep. She was just
And
a tool.
obviously they had no respect for women at all, or people in general. So I don't know what she was thinking, but I know she's a victim and I feel really sad for her family and everything, but she was also a participant.
Some of the responsibility lies on her shoulders.
She literally put herself in that situation. Literally, she agreed to. It's also very weird that she was wearing the wedding ring. Like, I know
That's dark.
people take trophies, but I just wonder what the extent of her, like, was she really just the lookout, or did she...
There's got to be more to it. Like, we're never going to know, right? Like, you're never going to know all of the
whys
whys,
and the
but
whats.
or like we weren't there, right? So we're not going to know how those people thought in that moment or what actually took place, but like he had to have strung her along.
Yeah. Also, it makes me wonder if he killed his wife because he was also just tired of her.
Sounds like he's just a serial
I'm
killer.
just tired of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are like, he only likes people for what he can get from them, right?
Yeah, they don't mean anything to him.
No. And when their use is
There's no
done,
connections.
they're done.
There's that lack of empathy.
On February
Love
9th, Gray was charged with 5 counts of capital murder for the Harvey murders, and Dandridge was charged with 3 counts of capital murder and the Tucker Bakersville murders.
And Dandridge is the older?
One of them is the uncle. They're both the same age, but one of them's the uncle and one of them's the nephew. So Ricky Gray is the uncle. He's 29. And Ray Joseph Dandridge is the nephew. And he's also 29 at the time.
Oh. And Dandridge had done time before?
I don't want to give any false info, so let me just double check that.
I'm so bad with names.
Me too. Gray was the one who was married to Treva. So Dandridge had lived with them after he was released, but I think they both had like criminal histories.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way they were raised and stuff definitely played a part into what they became.
Well, it's that phenomenon that we've talked about before when like-minded individuals find strength in the relationships they make with those like-minded individuals, where they're not afraid to talk about these crazy, sick fantasies they have because somebody's not going to be like, oh my God, that's awful. They're going to be like, yeah, and then what we could do is, like, they feed into each other.
I mean, they obviously found each other at a young age because they probably grew up together. And so Dandridge pleaded not guilty, but later pleaded guilty to life in prison without parole. That was the plea deal he got. He is currently incarcerated at the time of my research at Keene Mountain Correctional Center in Oakwood, Virginia. Gray pleaded not guilty, and his defense team asked for leniency, and they provided evidence that he was physically and sexually assaulted during childhood. They also alleged he was on PCP at the time the crimes occurred and had been abusing drugs and alcohol since before he was 11 years old. Which, I mean, I get how abusing drugs and alcohol from a young age changes your brain. I get that, right? As somebody who has survived childhood,
Trauma.
Abuse and trauma, I don't go around killing people. I don't even think about killing people. Okay? It's not on my to-do list, not even in my thoughts. I am mostly a happy person. I don't think that's an excuse.
It's not an all or nothing kind of thing, right? Like, it's definitely not everybody that goes through something like that is going to come out of it the same way. But it also is not an absolute to get rid of all guilt. Like, just because they have this past trauma, just because they abuse drugs, just because this and this and this, like, that doesn't remove the responsibility from your actions.
That's
like,
true.
That's not how...
You can't just say, yes, I did this, but it was because of all this. So really, I am not guilty.
I didn't do
because
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still your actions.
Right. Like, you still made
your choices.
Those actions. Yeah. You still made those choices. And whether, like, Jessica put it really well, like, whether you have that past guilt. Yeah, you can have a very traumatic childhood and a very traumatic upbringing, and you can have all of that and still turn out to be somebody who doesn't murder somebody or continuously rob people. And the fact that you've already, like, you've had your criminal history, you've been in trouble, like, you've been in the system, you've been in trouble already.
You probably had chances to get some help.
You have an understanding of, like, you've probably had chances to get help. You have an understanding of how this works. You have an understanding of what's expected of you. That can't just always be used to reduce a sentence or, like, make it, it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it okay that that entire family went through a horrific and not painless death. You know, that Ashley's family went through a horrific and not, like, I couldn't imagine the fear that was going through them at that moment, especially when it's your children. Like, could you?
Yeah, and
you
that's
wouldn't
what
care
I was
about
gonna say.
yourself.
Is, like, no, I would only, when something that we all know how I react when something scary or bad happens to my child. We all know it's not good, okay? But also my thought is, like, I don't understand, but I understand, like, crimes of passion or, like, stuff like that. How do you kill a child, I guess, is my question. I don't understand that at all. Like, I don't understand murder really anyway, but a child especially is just very hard for me to wrap my head around. And just the amount of evil
Well, it breaks
And
it
that-
back to like what we were just talking about, that so like people who are sociopaths do not have the same makeup as other people, and they do lack that empathy, and they do lack that like that anything, that compassion. Like they don't care. It was a curiosity. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, that would be a really horrific, very painful death. I just think
That's
that people
scary.
like, and he had already started that like downhill like roller coaster of like killing his wife, and I think it was him, or they had already started on that path, right? Like somebody, they've already killed at that point. They've already have the history of breaking in, doing robbery. It's only going to escalate from there because they're looking for that next high.
Well, I think too, like, why did he even get married is my question. But also then I think, well, he had to have gotten married before he came to stay with the family, right? Before the other subject came to stay with the family. And then when they got together, is that when they decide, like you said, they kind of just together kind of blew up a little bit more than they already had? And that's when they're like,
They're feeding off of each
yes.
other.
It could be related to their at the time that current drug use as well, right? Like it could have
Yes.
been
escalated.
all words and stuff before, but then you add in that final component of that last thing that just kicks them into the go mode. On top of the irrational, quote unquote, not normal way of thinking, you're taking away the restraint that they had. So it's no longer, they're acting on that impulse because they're being influenced by the drugs that they're on. And then the second after that's done, they've crossed that bridge already.
Yeah. And then they just keep going. And they probably just kept going with the drugs too.
Oh,
Just,
I'm
like,
sure.
fueling that fire.
Yeah.
So after 4 days of trial and a 30-minute deliberation, a jury found him guilty in August of 2006, and they recommended he receive the death penalty for Stella and Ruby, but life in prison for the other murder victims. On October 23rd, 2006, he was sentenced to death. So there's also this other crime that they thought he might be linked to. December 2006, Gray was indicted for the murder of a 37-year-old mother and legal secretary who had been shot and was found hanging by an electrical wire in the basement of her burning house. Her name was Cheryl Warner. An inmate by the name of Timothy Thomas told officers that Ashley had confessed to him that he was with Gray when he forced his way into her house and killed a lady, and that she saw the body hanging in the basement with the electrical cord. He alleged she was murdered because she was a witness to this crime, and his statement seemed convincing because it contained information that was kept from the public. It's alleged that Gray followed her home from the gas station, knocked on the door, and asked to use her phone when he pushed his way into the residence. According to Thomas, Bakersfield also told him that they went through the house and that she could hear a woman screaming in the basement. She also said that Gray had shown her the body, and Thomas said that Ashley was scared of Gray and that he had made threats to kill her if she would ever try to leave him. Cheryl's father had been on the phone with her when Gray knocked on the door, and he didn't think the male subject was alone. An open letter to the public from the Culpeper County Sheriff's Office states, "The person who murdered Sherry brought a lot of violence to the crime scene, and their behavior suggests a degree of criminal versatility. They were able to con their way into her home, spend time there, brutally kill her, and then escape. It is likely this person is not a stranger to violence and criminality, traits that would reflect in their arrest history and behavior." Unfortunately, charges on Gray were dropped on June 4th, 2008 due to contradictory evidence. Her murder is still unsolved to this day. However, many people still think that Gray may have been involved, and there's like whole Reddit threads that you could get lost on forever. On January 18th, 2017, after being denied clemency, Gray was executed. When asked if he had any last words, he said nope.
Because he doesn't.
Didn't have any remorse, didn't have anything to say. He just said nope.
They don't feel it.
Yeah. And that's the crazy story of the victims of Gray, Dandridge, and I would include Bakersfield because, like I said, she played a part. Although she was a victim, I don't think that everything that happened would have happened if she had not played part in it.
Yeah. Well, and it's a bad situation on both sides because obviously there's coercion and manipulation that was done to her as well.
Yeah. And people like that, like we've talked about before, kind of know how to
Tell
prey
people
on
what they
vulnerable
want.
people. Yeah.
Yep.
And then if she was scared, and let's say, I don't know whether or not she was involved in the murder of Cheryl, but like a lot of the stuff kind of makes you wonder. And then maybe they didn't want to charge him because he had already been sentenced to death. I don't know. And obviously I don't sadly, I don't think we're ever going to have an answer to who actually killed Cheryl because it's been so long. Who knows if we'll ever have an answer for that. But it just seems suspicious to me. It just seems weird because her friend, so either this guy who told police that she was involved in this and she told him all this stuff is involved in it, or what he said happened actually happened, because he had all this information that was in the crime scene, right? So like, where's somebody, either he knew somebody who was there when this happened and what he said about Ashley telling him is true, or he himself was involved, but then why in the world would he say Ashley told him this? So it just seems weird. It, like Jess has said many times, too many coincidences. I don't believe in them. I think that they may have been involved.
Just unfortunately comes down to it too. It's like, I don't know, like maybe there wasn't like lack of evidence, but evidence wasn't found, and it's too thin of a thread to like with the suspicious fire I was talking about earlier. Like they have a suspect, but they do not have enough to link. Yeah, they don't have enough evidence, or they don't have enough to link it all together. Like they don't have all the puzzle pieces. That's the frustrating part about some of these cases, is that you can know deep down in your gut that that person is guilty, or like you've got a lot of suspicion towards that, but unless you have like that evidence or that PC or that hard link, it's hard. Because and then you want to bring closure, right? You want to bring closure. You want to feel like you've given these victims some kind of peace. But sometimes you can't. You can't.
Yeah. Well, it's those checks and balances that are there to like, that help out on one side of the spectrum, that are there to be sure that people that are going up on trial, like there is the evidence to support so that they don't go away for something they didn't do. Those checks and balances on the flip side can keep somebody who did do something from getting the punishment they deserve because there's not enough.
Yeah. And there was a fire too, like they lit her house on fire. So
it's so interesting that pretty common knowledge by now that just because you start a fire doesn't mean the crime scene is going anywhere.
Yeah.
If anything, all you're doing is calling attention to the house in which you've committed the crime.
Yeah, and then people show up sooner.
Yeah.
But, I mean, some of the evidence could have been burned. There's always changes in crime scene processing and all the stuff that we can do with evidence, right? So maybe what they had then wasn't anything they could do much with. It just seems, and it's weird because they also used, so there was the fires. They both had fires. They both used electrical cord. I can't, like I said, I can't know for sure, but I feel like maybe there's a possibility that they were actually involved.
Yeah, and then we can't, it's not like we can talk to, which wasn't one put to death?
Gray was sentenced to death, and Dandridge is the one who's still serving time. So they could talk to Dandridge, but they think that he's going to admit to anything more? Probably not. I mean, I don't get why.
The only reason I think he would even talk, it would be like how Lawrence Bittaker talked, because
he liked the attention.
Attention, and he wanted people to think that he was remorseful. The brains are not the same, right? Like the only reason I think that guy would ever talk was to gain the fame or gain the attention that he, and also like Gray's not around. So like, and you kind of can compare facts, because you got two, like somebody's going to say something that says it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's either going to match or it's not going to match. But now that Dandridge is the only one left out of all of this, so it's like,
why would he say anything?
Why would he A, say anything, and B, he can say whatever the hell he wants. He can be like, oh yeah, that guy totally did it, and he could be the one who did it.
Yep.
So there's no way to check it.
And Ashley's not here to tell us anything either. So on a side note, a memorial fund was set up in honor of the Harvey family. According to the World of Mirth website, the Brian and Catherine Harvey Family Memorial Endowment was created by their friends and family to provide music, visual art, and performing arts enrichment in the greater Richmond area. And according to Richmond.com, Brian and Catherine shared a love of music and art, and they were known to their family and friends as kind and generous people. The Community Foundation said in a statement, the Memorial Fund ensures that their legacy will continue by supporting projects that encourage families and community to come together through music, visual art, and performing arts enrichment. At least they left something good behind.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's awesome.
I just wonder, like, what their daughters would have become.
Right? Like, what they would have grown up to do and what their music would have done.
What kind of art they would have made.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Truth, Lies, and Alibis.